Here's what I know to be true. Everyone leads in their life, in their work, in their relationships, whether they have a title or not. And this podcast is for those of you who felt invisible, underestimated, or like you had more to give than the world made room for. You know there's more in you, but maybe you haven't always had the space, the support, or the tools to show up fully as yourself. This isn't about pushing yourself to produce fake positivity or perfection. It's about dignity. It's about truth. It's about moving from surviving to thriving out loud. So take a breath, press play, and let's grow together. Welcome to Thrive Out Loud. Hey Thrivers, welcome back to Thrive Out Loud. Today's conversation is about when pushing through life stops working. It did for me, and had I not chosen to do something different, I could have taken 10 or more years off my life. Today, I want to walk you through how decades of pushing to meet realistic and unrealistic expectations, trying to prove myself to others and working to survive the grind eventually caught up with my body, and how being relentless to find the answers to my health concerns changed everything for me. There was a season in my life where I could not walk up the stairs without holding on to the railing. I couldn't get in and out of a car without bracing myself. I was 50 years old and I felt 90. And here's the thing. I was succeeding many ways in life and business. I was in a better place than I'd ever been, and I was working towards taking my successes to the next level. Yet my mind and my body were not able to keep up with my ambitions. I was exhausted from surviving. The crazy thing was I didn't know that was what I was doing. I was just being who I've always been, a fighter, an advocate, a driver towards results. For most of my adult life, I worked 70 to 80 hours a week. I started as a social worker, holding space for trauma, crisis, heartbreak, and survival stories every single day. From my very first role, I wasn't just doing a job, I was fighting for my clients to not just survive, but to find moments of dignity, stability, and even glimpses of thriving in situations they did not choose and could not control. When you work in a county system, your clients don't come to you because life's going well. They come because they meet very specific criteria: aging, disability, extreme vulnerability. They are often navigating the hardest seasons of their life. I served individuals who were aging without support, people living with significant disabilities, families stretched beyond capacity. They were doing everything they could just to get through the day. And I wasn't just advocating for services. I was fighting a system that made help complicated, slow, confusing, sometimes nearly impossible to access. I pushed for policy changes. I challenged procedures. I searched for creative, innovative ways to bridge gaps that I believe shouldn't have existed in the first place. For years, I lived in advocacy mode. And here's what I didn't realize at the time. When you spend your days fighting systems and carrying other people's trauma and holding the weight of survival stories, your central nervous system never turns off. I was constantly activated, constantly on alert, constantly pushing my boundaries of success and that of the systems I was working in. To me, that was my role, and that was my strength. Over time, work defined who I was. It was what I was good at, and it became my whole life. Helping others brought meaning to my existence. If I was advocating, fixing, fighting, serving, I felt valuable. If I wasn't, I didn't quite know who I was. By the age of 28, I started longing for more in life and started diving into my personal development work that I had no idea was going to be another full-time job. At least that's how I set it up. All or nothing, that was my motto. I began reading, reflecting, going to leadership trainings. I generally wanted to grow. I wanted what I thought everyone else had: a partner, a home, children, happiness. And to have that, I knew I had to discover what was getting in my way. And boy, was there much getting in my way. I approached personal development in the same way I approached my career: with intensity, with pressure, with the belief that if I just worked hard enough at becoming better, I would finally be and feel enough. What I didn't realize is it would take many more years to understand how to navigate my past, my mindsets, my emotions, and my behaviors, and loosen the grip of the expectations that I thought I had to meet. Instead of relieving pressure, I added more. I worked so hard at being my best as a professional, as a woman, as a human, telling myself that the feeling of not being okay would pass as soon as I reached my goals in life. I was fooling myself. Since college, I'd been morbidly obese. My body hurt constantly. My back would go out almost monthly. I couldn't climb stairs without huffing and puffing. And even after becoming aware of the many ways I got in my own way in life and striving to find a better way, I was stuck. Emotionally, I was angry at myself and the world. I was depressed and I was exhausted. I was carrying everyone else's survival along with navigating my own. And I still thought the answer was to push harder. And somewhere in the middle of all that learning, growing, and pushing, and something began to shift. It wasn't overnight. It even wasn't dramatic. It was slow. It was a slow process. It was a slow, conscious awakening for me. As I kept doing the internal work, imperfectly, of course, I began to untangle surviving from identity. I started declaring that I was more than my history, more than what I could fix, more than who I could rescue. And as I began loosening the grip of that survival mindset, I found myself open in a way I hadn't been before. Open to the risks of love, open to partnership without any guarantees, open to the possibility that I didn't have to carry life alone. I was ready to get myself out there, even though I had gone through a lot, especially in searching to find a relationship. I was determined to figure it out, and I was determined to be okay whether I found someone or whether I didn't. I just needed to find what was going to work for me. And at 36, I did. I met the love of my life. I got married. And by that age, getting married wasn't just about having a wedding. It was about finally finding someone who loved me for who I was, not for what they needed me to be. It was about choosing a partner I could do life with, someone to share the good, the hard, the complicated, and even the ugly. So for so long, I'd carried everything by myself. Marriage felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one I had longed for what felt like forever. But here's the honest truth. While love changed my life, which it did in so many wonderful ways, it did not erase my patterns. Because you can't change just your environment. But if you don't heal your wiring, your survival instincts still show up. Getting married in my later 30s, I was ready for that. I was ready for marriage. I was ready for being able to be in partnerships or a partnership that I longed for. I'd prayed for it. I'd worked toward becoming someone who could sustain it. But becoming a mom, that I felt different about. I wasn't sure I could ever feel fully ready, if anyone really ever feels ready to be a parent. I hoped I would have the chance one day, and I carried real fears about the kind of mother I would be. Would I repeat my patterns? Would I repeat the patterns of my parents? Would my past show up in ways I couldn't control? Would I be enough as a mom? And then at 38 and a half, I became a mom. And without question, bringing in my daughter into this world is one of the greatest gifts and joys of my life. I was considered an older mom, but honestly, I thought that was an advantage. Now, I'd go to the grocery store and people would ask me if my daughter was my granddaughter. That didn't feel so great. But I was proud to be an older mom. I had done years of personal work. I was more self aware. I was wiser than I'd been in my 20s. And my husband and I were in this together. I remember thinking to myself, I can do this. And in many ways, I could. But what I didn't understand was what pregnancy and delivery at that age would demand of my body. The delivery was complicated. My body experienced trauma in ways I didn't fully process at the time. But I focused on the baby. I focused on being strong and pushing through my fears. I focused on recovering as quickly as possible so I wouldn't be a burden to my husband. What I didn't focus on was actual healing. And looking back now, that season marked the beginning of a quiet acceleration. It was the start of a health decline I never anticipated could happen in my 40s. Yet I continued to push through. My body had already been carrying decades of stress, overwork, inflammation, and unprocessed trauma. Motherhood challenged my confidence in myself, and what it really did was expose what was already fragile. And instead of slowing down and taking it day by day, I sped up. I thought I was going to slow down. Even before I had my daughter, I knew something had to change. I knew I couldn't continue doing social work the way I had been, working 70 to 80 hours a week, carrying crisis after crisis, and be the kind of wife and mother I wanted to be. My husband and I made a decision together. Once the baby was born, I would step away from my career as a social worker and become a stay-at-home mom, at least until our child, or children if we were blessed with more, were in school. On paper, it made sense. In my heart, it felt right. But I also knew something else. Work brought me lots of fulfillment. Achievement brought me energy. Helping people gave me identity. And I wasn't naive enough to think that staying home full time wouldn't challenge me. So I told myself I'd do something small. Part-time premarital education, a little individual coaching, something to keep my mind engaged and my creative energy alive. And once our daughter was born, I took a couple of months off, and then opportunities started showing up. A friend needed help launching a business. A few coaching clients came my way. I was doing premarital education through our church. And before I even realized what was happening, I was working over 70 hours a week again. Some of it was motherhood, some of it was projects, and some of it was paid work. But all of it was fueled by the same thing. I didn't know how to rest without feeling irrelevant. Part of it was financial. We did need additional income. Then came the moment that broke through denial. When I couldn't go up and down stairs, when I had to physically lift my legs to get into my car, that's when I called the Mayo Clinic. 3 months of waiting to get in while in constant discomfort, 3 months of wondering what was wrong with me, and then came the testing. Heart monitor, needles with electrodes in my legs, hips, and arms, scans, a sleep study, appointments with a general practitioner, a psychologist, psychiatrist, neurologist, and a fibromyalgia specialist. Dozens of procedures, and then finally an answer. I was told that years of trauma, years of nonstop stress, years of pushing through pain had created a physiological stress response in my brain that pushed my central nervous system over the edge, causing my amygdala to be on fire, my inability to get good sleep, and my muscles to seize up in response. I was living in fight, flight, or freeze. Not occasionally, constantly. And I couldn't shut it off. I couldn't calm my brain no matter what I did. And here's the part that hit me the hardest. My body could no longer tell the difference between good stress and bad stress. An exciting business opportunity triggered the same response as a threat. A deadline triggered the same response as danger. My husband losing his job put me in a tailspin internally. My symptoms weren't random. They were the direct result of ignoring my body for decades. I was self-aware enough to know I was killing myself, but could I regulate myself enough to stop? Nope. And then the guilt. That, I think, was more debilitating than anything else. My family was stressed because I was stressed. The very people I loved most were absorbing the fallout of my inability to get answers to my health issues and find my way out. So I made the hardest professional decision of my life. I declared bankruptcy for my business. I stopped working for 6 months. Now, for some people are like, ooh, yay, 6 months, that must have been great. No. Uh, for someone who had worked 70 to 80 hours a week for decades, that felt like detox. And I treated getting healthy like it was a job. I prioritized sleep. I addressed the inflammation squeezing the life out of me. I worked deeply on trauma processing and learned how to regulate my nervous system instead of just being aware of it. It wasn't easy work. Getting healthy was and continues to be the hardest challenge of my life. But I will say it's the kind of work that gives back in a way I never knew possible. Eventually, I rebuilt my business, but this time I vowed to only work part-time because the doctors pretty much told me that if I didn't stop working the way I'd been working, I was going to take 10 years off my life. And here's what shocked me. I actually made more money working part-time than I ever did working full-time. I was much more focused. I was only focused on doing the things that I knew I did well. I set better boundaries. I was no longer building from survival. I was creating stability. And I even did that during COVID. But when the COVID crisis settled, then I decided one last thing yet to face. The most persistent health issue I'd carried most of my life, my weight. I no longer wanted to live in a body that carried not only physical pain, but emotional and historical pain. For me, my weight wasn't just about food. It was tied to protection, to trauma, to years of abuse as a child. And in 2022, I made another courageous decision. I had gastric bypass surgery and lost 110 pounds. I've never been thin. I'm not thin now, but I've never been to where I could actually wear like normal sizes from the time I was in 4th grade. So this has been all new for me. And let me be clear that having gastric bypass was not the easy way out. It required discipline, restructuring my relationship with food, confronting food noise that still shows up at times. But I have better tools now, better regulation, better awareness, and I have better compassion, especially for myself. I'm still working towards my weight goal, and along the way, I've learned something really important. It's not a race. It's a constant, consistent journey, and I'm up for the challenge because this time I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm building a life that's sustainable, and I intentionally continue to thrive out loud. So let me ask you, where are you overworking to feel safe? Where are you ignoring physical symptoms? Where are you emotionally hijacked and blaming yourself? If your body is screaming, it's not betraying you, it's protecting you. It's telling you to pay attention because something needs to be addressed. Thriving began for me when I stopped abandoning myself. If you can relate to even a fraction of my story, I invite you to take one step this week. Take the time to be aware of what's going on in your body. Schedule that appointment you've been avoiding. Say no to things you know you don't have the mindset, time, or capacity for, and mean it. Choose one of those. You do not have to crash before you ask for help. You're worthy of being on your own radar screen. Thanks for spending this time with us on Thrive Out Loud. We'll see you next time. As you move throughout your day, I want to remind you, you don't have to have everything figured out to be moving forward. Thriving isn't about perfection, it's about awareness, small everyday choices, and learning to lead yourself and others with intention. If today's episode resonated, take a moment to reflect. Share it with someone who might need it, or simply notice what stood out for you. If you would like to continue the conversation, connect with other thrivers, and find out about up-and-coming events, take a moment to sign up for the Thrive Out Loud community. You can find a link on the Thrive Out Loud landing page on my website at dsauderllc.com. Thanks for being here, and until next time, go forth and be fabulous.